Welcome, everyone. I'm Jeffrey Goodman, Director of Marketing and Development for the YMCA of Northwest Louisiana, and we're here at 318 Latino Studios for Shreveport-Bossier, my city, my community, my home. And I can't wait to have today's discussion. It's with Dr. Michael Hicks. Michael, good to see you.
Is it weird calling me Dr. Hicks?
It's not. It's not. It feels very natural to me.
So, full disclosure, we are classmates. We're going to put that out there, Jeffrey? Or?
That's right. That's where I'm starting, actually.
Okay.
So, this is the way I'm starting today. So, although you and I don't know each other all that well, we go way back.
Yes.
We were at Caddo Middle Magnet at the same time.
Absolutely.
And then after that, at Captain Shreve together.
Yes.
I once heard you use the term invisible backpack. Explain what that is, if you could, and tell me, if you could, what was in your invisible backpack in those years at Middle Magnet and or Shreve.
Okay. That's a very deep question just to start off. What about how you doing, Michael? It's been years. Let's talk. Goodness, Jeffrey, excellent question. And before I get into that, can I give a little background? I just want to say that, Jeffrey, you're right. We don't know each other that well, but we do go way back. And looking at you, I see the high school and middle school version of Jeffrey Goodman. I wonder if you see that version of myself.
I do,
okay.
Absolutely.
We said we're classmates, but I'm a year older than you. You are in the same class as my wife, who graduated, who was actually at Middle Magnet and Captain Shreve with us, Demecia, and she put this thing together. I also want to say that this may be the first father and son interviewee team that you've ever had.
It is.
Jeffrey had the pleasure of interviewing my son, and my son had the pleasure of being interviewed by him a few months ago, and I hope your audience will go back and check that if they haven't seen it. So I'm following in the footsteps of my son by sitting on the couch here with you today, and I'm honored to do so. To get right into it, Jeffrey, invisible backpack is not a Michael Hicks term. It's a term that exists in the educational research, and it can mean a couple of things. And I think the thing that the reference that you saw, you may have seen a speech or an interview, and I referenced it. The invisible backpack is an analogy I use when I teach educators. I'm an education professor by trade and discipline, and so I get a lot of time to work with folks who are in the classroom as teachers. I started as a substitute teacher myself right here in Caddo Parish. But when we talk about invisible backpack, we talk about those youngsters who bring with them so much baggage to school. Now, there are students like Dr. Carl Goodman's son and Dr. Raymond Hicks' son, I'm speaking of you and I, who may not have as much in their invisible backpack. But Jeffrey, there are a lot of students, particularly here in our parish, who bring so many things to the school environment that it really forces, it demands that our teachers rise above their certification or just their education, but actually become empathetic counselors and cheerleaders and parental job application filler-outers and sometimes transportation providers. It demands so much of our educators. And so things that kids bring in that invisible backpack is hurt, sometimes pain, and the pain can be associated with poverty a lot of times. There are a lot of students, Jeffrey, believe it or not, and again, although folks like you and I may not have experienced that, I think about my father, who was one of 15 children who grew up in absolute poverty, and I think about his experiences of sometimes having to open the icebox or a refrigerator on a Friday and having no food in it, knowing that they wouldn't get another good meal until they got to school Monday. And so sometimes as educators, we forget that students bring those feelings, those emotions, some would even say in this day, those past traumas with them. And to ignore them, I believe, is to the detriment of the teacher, right? Because they got into the helping profession to help. There's some who have snuck into the teaching profession who don't belong there, but I promise you the majority of teachers in this parish are there because they want to be and they understand the calling that it requires. I think that by ignoring it, it hurts not only the teacher, but definitely the student in ways you can clearly see. But really, it hurts that school culture. Because by the time a student is third or fourth grade, if they've gotten a pattern of educators who are temporary and who don't care and who aren't willing to see what's in that invisible backpack, it's just, I don't know, it's not just bad for the school, the teacher, and the student, but really our community and our city. And I'm proud to say that there are principals in this parish, several of whom I'd like to consider friends and partners, who are actively working to make sure that those Caddo Parish school children's invisible backpacks are seen by their faculty and staff. And I want to give a shout out to all those hardworking, not just principals, but administrative staff members and certainly classroom teachers who go to work every day in this parish in a job that does not pay them what they truly deserve, but they give their all every day. So that's what I meant by using the analogy of invisible backpack. Now, as an education professor, I have a whole bunch of analogies, so if you want me to pull out a few more, I will. To get to your second part of that question, Jeffrey, that's interesting. What did I bring in my invisible backpack? I was blessed first at Judson Elementary, then at Middle Magnet and at Shreve to have teachers who cared and concerned and got to know me. And so I guess being a chubby, kind of overweight kid, I guess I had a lot of insecurities in my backpack. And a lot of times I would try to overcompensate that by, I guess, I don't know, humor. I guess, and probably in a way a therapist would say I still do now. I think I'm a very accomplished person, but I think I still have insecurities. I still battle against perfectionism and, high expectations. It was interesting that, at part of my childhood schooling, my father was on the school board. And so I was not the national merit finalist type student. I was a C student all through school mostly. And so, I felt a lot of pressure. And so I think I just had a lot of insecurities about who I was as a young person, trying to navigate that part of adolescence where I'm supposed to put on a cool pose and kind of be one way, but I still kind of felt I was more gregarious and more humorous. So, a typical adolescent kid, I thank the Lord that I was not given some of the burdens that a lot of our school kids have to deal with. But nonetheless, there were teachers who understood that I had insecurities and who saw me and who helped bring out the very best in me. So that's what was in my invisible backpack. Now, Dr. Carl Goodman's son, what was in your invisible backpack?
I think the same as yours. Lots of insecurities.
Yeah, isn't that interesting that we can share that as, I don't know if 20 years ago we would have even been able to admit that.
No. And I came, that was the first time I'd been in public school. I'd come from private schooling up until 6th grade. And
okay.
So it was insecurity, but also just awe. Like awe of, wow, I've never seen this as my community. Wow. This looks so much different than everything I've seen up till now.
Yeah, that's the one of the beauties I say about Captain Shreve, man, is that 71106 zip code. You have some of the most affluent addresses in that zip code, and some just regular middle class folk, and even some certainly a little bit of poverty mixed into that. And so at Shreve, you just got to have an education about the world, and it all worked. You know what I mean? No matter what community you were from, we talked earlier off camera about Mike Johnson being our student government president. Now, you really had to be able to know and to maneuver in a lot of different groups to be at Shreve. So even though I may not have come from that same background as you, I think I got an education coming from Judson when I went to Middle Magnet, and certainly it continued on at Captain Shreve.
Love that. And I had never heard invisible backpack prior to prepping for today's discussion, so I really like that term, and thanks for hopping in there with me.
Very welcome, very welcome.
So this next question's super long. It's a way for me to kind of provide some background on you, so just hang in there a little bit with me. If I get anything wrong, just jump in. But you hold a doctorate degree in education leadership from Louisiana Tech University.
Correct.
And your area of expertise is in leadership, justice, and identity.
Yes.
You have a wide range of experience in education, starting as a substitute teacher, which you mentioned, in Caddo Parish, and later working as a community mental health specialist, school counselor, and faculty member at esteemed higher education institutions, including Southern University at Shreveport and Centenary College of Louisiana. A couple of people have said to me recently, this is my question, a couple of people have said to me recently how the magnet school system might not be the ideal school system for our community, particularly in how it potentially has a negative impact on some of our neighborhood schools. So my question for you is, in your opinion, is the magnet school system a bridge too far? And I heard Theron use that term, so I did steal that, even though I didn't really give him credit in the question. Is the magnet school system a bridge too far? And do you know of or see a better approach for our community?
Again, Jeffrey, this was not the lighthearted, let's talk about days at Captain Shreve interview I thought it was going to be. But I certainly am excited that you even asked that question. You know, I spent a lot of my early career talking about the magnet system, even researching and speaking boldly about educational options, particularly for Black students. And so, you know, I'll share a little bit of my feelings, and I hope that there are interested folk who I can continue this conversation with. If memory serves me right, it was several years ago, perhaps even decades ago, where Walter Lee, who was then superintendent of DeSoto Parish Schools, and former Caddo Parish superintendent, said that he never thought that the magnet system would still be going in Caddo. And so to say that, just to give you a little background on how magnets work, I think that at a time in the 80s, going into the 90s, when we were trying to attract industry like GE and other places to not only come, but to continue to build infrastructure here in our town, I think the magnet system was a way to address segregation. Our schools were segregated, and despite there being a mandated crossover, which, interesting enough, I'd like to share a little bit of that story about how the crossover affected our alma mater, Captain Shreve, and I want to definitely talk about those students who were plucked from Eden Gardens Elementary, Eden Gardens Junior High, Eden Gardens Senior High, only to be told in that 1969-70 school year that now you got to go to Captain Shreve, a place where they were not welcome, they were not wanted, didn't have the same experiences as me because of the segregation that existed in our schools. And so to get back to that, to that question, I think that in order to initiate some sort of fairness, that magnet schools were a great idea. It's not the magnet concept. I'm a product of magnet schools. Judson Fundamental Magnet, Caddo Middle Magnet, and then Captain Shreve. But I mean, it's how we do it. And so everywhere else in the country, for the most part, I would say upwards of 90% of the country that still has a magnet system, they do it on a lottery basis. And so, for instance, if there is a Caddo Parish magnet high school, well, then you know what? Certain kids from every district, every neighborhood across the school, across the city, or parish rather, can come to this magnet school. But we aren't going to take every student, every top student out of every district. We're going to do a lottery. So we'll probably have some A students, some B students, or whatever the requirements that we set up. But doing it in terms of a lottery, and it has its pros and cons, it's just different than the way we do it now. The effect of this magnet school system that we've had in effect for so long in Caddo is really we've created a quasi-private school system. And so what happens is...
Let me interrupt one second. So
okay.
It's lottery versus testing is maybe...
Lottery versus testing.
Okay.
You know, I live on South Shreveport, and I saw a sign that said magnet school testing. And for some reason, I don't remember seeing those signs when I was growing up. And I don't remember seeing them off Jewel or off Greenwood. Maybe they existed, but I know that I became I became a magnet school student really because my mother was a teacher. So she had an inside track on how the magnet process worked. And for so many folk without connections or and I mean just connections with educators or people at their church and civic groups, or they may see at work. The magnet school system is hidden from a lot of people, and so what has happened is we've gotten this magnet school now entrenched in how we do schools in Caddo Parish, and what we see consistently is those top academic students from let's say Green Oaks or Woodlawn or Booker Washington districts, a lot of those top academic students are plucked out. And so whenever you have any group of students and you pluck out all the positive peers and you leave more negative or average peers, well, then data tells us, any analysis will tell us that you're going to see a skew towards more negative outcomes. And so we've seen it for decades. We've just never said it. And so I spent a lot of my young career trying to talk about those educational opportunities. And honestly, if it's fair, particularly for kids in poverty and specifically for Black kids, I don't care if you call it magnet, parochial, Catholic, religious. I don't care what you call it, as long as it levels the playing field. I am a subscriber to the philosophy or the psychology, if you will, of Alfred Adler. And Adler was a psychologist who believed that schools should be as democratic as possible, meaning they should do certain things, like we depend on our government to do certain things. Well, schools have an equal responsibility in Adlerian view. And so I kind of take that same approach, that we ought to use our public school systems to try to level the approach. There's some students who are going to have access to opportunities that others aren't. And I think that public schools are the ways to equalize that. But on the magnet system, I try not to be as critical as I was when I was younger, because I studied it more then. But just, the older I get, the more I see a lot of things changing. And so even though, yes, we do typically save our best resources, our most highly certified, qualified teachers and all other type things for those magnet schools, there are just a lot of good things going on in neighborhood schools around the parish that I don't think we give a lot of or enough light to. But that would be if I had a magic wand and could change our magnet system, I think our magnet schools are great, and I wouldn't want to disrupt them at all. But I think the access, who gets access to those schools, can be looked at a little bit differently.
Love that.
Now, as someone who hadn't studied that and who hadn't talked about charter schools, I mean, when I first talked about even charter schools as an employee of Caddo Parish schools, there were some older educators who thought I was a sellout to the public school system, because I don't care what you call it, charter, parochial, if it can give us opportunities to do education better, I agree. But as someone who doesn't come from that, you come from a more creative side of the world. Jeffrey, what are your thoughts on that explanation of magnet school, you being a product of magnet schools as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was a wonderful experience for me. I've never even heard. I mean, I didn't even know a lottery. I'm not an educator. I don't know a lot about your area of expertise. I didn't even know they do it differently somewhere else. So I'm not versed enough to know, like, we did a lottery system, what the pros and cons to that would be. But that's interesting for me to hear, and certainly something that I'd like to explore more, if it's a way to do more for some of our neighborhood schools who maybe are not getting the attention they deserve. Yeah,
just on its face, on its surface, if you had a neighborhood and you said, listen, this is a great neighborhood school. We live together, we work together, we see each other, we help raise each other's kids, but we're going to have an avenue for the very best students who have the best test scores, the best academic, the strongest students. We're going to have an avenue for them to go to another school across town. Does that sound, just on its face, that it would have some ramifications?
Yeah, it sounds problematic.
Okay.
I mean, the thing that you said that sticks with me the most is the idea that, if I take all the top students away from this place, this one school, then clearly it's going to have a negative impact on the ones that remain.
Yeah. And it's not I don't want to give an idea in this interview that it's just an easy fix. Oh, here's the problem, let's fix it. My good friend and my Morehouse brother, who I went to college with, Lamar Goree, is doing a great job with Caddo schools, and I know it takes a whole lot to run a district like that. So I don't want to give the impression that, hey man, there's a problem and here's easily how you solve it. If it were done that easy, it would have been done. But I'm glad that we still have good folk in the community talking about it.
Yeah, I think it's something to be looked at and something to continue to discuss and to see if we are always doing as well as we can.
Agreed.
So I'm gonna stick with the hard balls. I don't know if I have any softballs for you today. Sorry. So you taught, I don't know if you're still teaching, you can clarify this, but you taught a course at Centenary College entitled Doing Race.
Yes.
We've talked quite a bit on this podcast about how to do better creating and accepting a multi-ethnic Shreveport. So my question for you, which I think is the tagline of your first Doing Race course, is how do we do better as a community dealing with our differences differently and, in fact, better?
Yeah, that was a tagline. There's some great research you're coming up with. I taught at Centenary for 4 years, I think from 2018 to 2022. And I really got to thank the good people at Centenary, starting with the president, Chris Holloman, for giving me an opportunity to boldly be who I am as an active, as someone who participates in what they call active research. I don't like to just sit in the library and write about and even think about mostly, these philosophies or these things that great researchers have come up with. I like to take that research and put it into the field. I've always done that my entire career, and certainly Centenary, again, beginning with the president, allowed me to do that while I was there. I started in 2018, and that same year I proposed a course, and I believe I started teaching it in 2019. That course was Doing Race. And so what I wanted to do was see if I could get students from multiple backgrounds, ethnicities, to come and talk about race in a very honest way on the campus of this liberal arts, prestigious college right here in Shreveport, that has typically not had a lot of access, certainly by black male professors like myself, but black students. I joke with folks in my interview, Jeff, I said, listen, the last time I was on Centenary's campus was when my mom and dad brought me to hear the Jackson 5 in the Gold Dome. I must have been like in elementary school, but even being on their campus, represented a side of Shreveport that really a lot of us don't get a chance to see. So I was definitely excited with what happened. Look, in that class, not only did I open it up to the campus, but really the community. And so I said, I'm going to teach a class on race. This was at a time pre-George Floyd and pre-Black Lives Matter, where, race was kind of subjugated to only being discussed as a black thing. When you still hear the word diversity, you may think that's a black people issue. Well, actually, no. All of us like diversity in food. That's why Golden Corral is open, or the Diamond Jack's buffet. Diversity is not a race-specific term, but we took these terms, diversity, equity, inclusion in 2018, 2019, and said, let's talk to young students about it. We looked at the amount of time that police actions, particularly on black suspects, spends in local news, not just in Shreveport, but across the country. We looked at how people do race economically in housing. We talked about historic redlining, and we brought in some local stuff. We talked about how people do race in education. And of course, that's how the crossover of Captain Shreve became something that I have spent a lot of time learning about from those folk who lived it. It's not ancient history. It was something that happened in our lifetime. And so by opening that class up, not just to the community, but the city, I think, number one, it's still shaping my life. From that course, I developed a training program for corporate America and even municipal and private or in public organizations. And the name of that program is called the Fairness Advantage. And so I discovered, man, by teaching that course on race, that it really wasn't me teaching DEI to corporate officers and staff members at these Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 companies. It was really me convincing them of the advantage of approaching everything in business with fairness in mind. And so because, that sounds revolutionary, you have to just kind of break it down. But actually doing race led to my current teaching and training with my current company. And again, it's just about fairness. And so that's how I approached the class, Jeffrey. We presented some stuff about history, and we presented some stuff about current situations here in Shreveport, in Louisiana, and abroad, across the country, rather. And we just asked students, is this fair? Is this fair? Okay, and so that is not a simple question to answer. You know, even as you and I talked about the magnet school situation, we can ask, you know, okay, is it fair this, if we look at certain data points right now in Caddo schools, is this fair? You know, but the answer is not always black and white. It's very nuanced, and it requires us to think and talk and learn from one another. And so what I think I really did the most by advancing and teaching that class was I think I brought folks together. I certainly brought disciplines together. I was able to connect with professors in other disciplines across that campus. They had students who would take the class. That was an entree for them to get to know me, and I forged relationships that will last a long time. I got to get to know folk in the community. One of the, I mean, it's a tripped out thing, Jeffrey, but this is Shreveport. I do not know how this happened. Two beautiful, and I mean, their minds are beautiful. Two beautiful women in Shreveport, Judy Williams and Roxanne Johnson, connected with me some sort of way. And I don't know if someone mentioned to them about the class, but here's what I do know. They came to one class. And check this out. They ended up becoming big sisters and moms to students in that class. They actually created a class library. They themselves went to Amazon and ordered a bunch of books on race and critical thinking, and they offered those books to my students. And I just ran into a student in Kroger maybe a couple weeks ago who was part of one of those initial classes, and they don't remember what I said. They don't remember the ways I made them think. They remember those two ladies, those two beautiful ladies who gave of themselves. They gave their heart to that class. And so doing race will always have a special part of who I am now. As I said, it continues in the work I'm doing right now with more corporate training and teaching. But it's just, you know, I'm honored that that class was birthed right here in my hometown, beautiful Shreveport, Louisiana.
Yeah, I wish I could have taken it.
You know, I've been asked by a couple other institutions, none local, to revive that class and offer it, because my students have gone on to do some great things and they've talked about that class. Who knows? Maybe that's something I'll do right here in Shreveport as I, you know, get into my older years. As my dad, who's 80, tells me, he's trying to do some things. He's looking for things to leave his legacy. So I joke with him and say, well, I got about 30 more years until I get to that point. But maybe that's one of the things I can look at in terms of leaving a legacy. You know, I want people to remember that while I was here, I helped bring people together, whether it was across campus, a beautiful campus like Centenary, or whether it was across our city.
Well, if you do it again, I'm in, 100%.
You're my first student, I promise you that.
Okay. Well, we talked a little bit off camera about your dad, and he's come up a little bit in today's discussion. So let me just explain to people who he was. You have a unique perspective as your father, Dr. Raymond Hicks, was the president of Grambling University in the 90s. My question for you is, we're going to cover both sides of this. In your opinion, what's the same or worse today in terms of local race relations?
You know, can I share a little bit of the conversation we had off camera prior?
Yeah, totally.
You know, I'm not Pollyannish or I don't have dreamy doe eyes when it comes to us dealing together as blacks and whites here in this city. But as I mentioned to you, I'm a little more optimistic the older I've gotten. And so in that vein, Jeffrey, to be honest with you, one thing that disturbs me is that I think we have forgotten a lot of our racial history. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. Times are moving so fast, you know, sometimes we forget. Now, I'll give you a good example. Knowing that this is a product of the YMCA, you know, when your classmate, Demesia, my wife, first told me that you contacted her and you wanted me to do the show, I started thinking about the Y, and I've been thinking about it ever since. The YMCA is where I first had the opportunity to build up the confidence and the boldness to ask another 8th grader, a young lady, I can't remember her name, I can see her right now, a little short, curl, cute as she wanted to be, to dance with me. And it was at the Carver Branch YMCA at a dance. And they used to have dances when I was little. That was a huge source of our recreation, being from Queensboro. At first, I wasn't allowed to walk with the big kids from my neighborhood all the way to the Carver Y on Hearn. But a couple times I did sneak, and those times changed my life. I'm still talking about that first time I asked this young lady to dance with me. The name of the song was Slow Jams. I play another slow jam. And I wonder if my son is over there laughing. I wonder if any of your viewers know who the artist, and we going back to 80s R&B, who sang that song. That's a little Easter egg I'll put in the podcast. If you find me and tell me who sang the song Slow Jam, that was the name of the song, either Slow Jam or Play Another Slow Jam, I will shake your hand and buy you a cup of coffee. But but nevertheless, that why, and it was important and significant to folks in my generation. But that particular branch of the YMCA, and I don't know how many people know this, so I hope I'm using this as a teachable moment. That Y was the birthplace for what became the Caddo Parish Teachers Federal Credit Union. And that credit union first opened up to teachers by teachers, B.D. Harrison and Albert Moody, was an alternative to the then segregated white credit unions for teachers, who would allow you to join as a black teacher, but didn't have the same stance on providing loans. The Caddo Parish Teachers Federal Credit Union, I like to say, is solely responsible for helping create the black middle class in our city. It helped teachers get loans to buy cars and to send kids to college, and to have a little money when they needed to pay, on the rent or the mortgage. That credit union, still in existence today, still thriving today. Their first office was at the Carver Branch YMCA. And one of the things that branch did, I learned, was that they rented office space to folks in the community. So think about that. We know that the YMCA, like other organizations, was segregated in the South. Maybe not so much in other parts of the country, but during the 50s or up into the 50s, 60s, it was a segregated organization. And so that branch, is so responsible for what I consider to be some of the people who are forming the lifeblood of Shreveport today. But right now, you would know that. You would pass by that branch and not know it. Now, we got a big, beautiful assembly, building right off the parkway named for Mayor Fant. But a lot of people don't realize just how historic that George Washington Carver branch of the YMCA was to Black Shreveport. And so I guess again, man, Jeffrey, you are always a little, you're younger than me, man. So I always thought you were a little underclassman. I'm seeing that little boy in you as I'm talking to you now. You know what I'm saying? But the older we get, I guess the more sensitive, or the more appreciative we become of our local history. So if there's any, I don't know if there are probably a lot of things that some social scientists could talk about, may have not improved. But one thing that I'd like to see is us just remember and recall, some of the things that this city did to fight some of the negative aspects of what living in the Jim Crow South brought. So,
and what's the best way to commemorate that, or what's the best way to start telling that story?
Hopefully there'll be some people who will hear this podcast and say, B.D. Harrison, Albert Moody, who were those guys? Let's go back and look at the Carver YMCA. Are there other bits of history that we just don't know about? I mean, it was the first time I got an opportunity to swim. The Carver Y had a swimming pool back there. So I mean, maybe people will come to the Wallet branch of the Shreve Memorial Library, which is located right next door. They are another rich treasure trove of just history. So I think really just talking, Jeffrey, having the opportunity to talk about some of these things, I think that's the very best way to commemorate and to make sure, that we remember who we are as a community. Because if we forget, if we push those things aside, then, some youngster will grow up and think that the YMCA only exists off a parkway named after Mayor Fant, when that is not the case. And so I think just talking about some of those stories can be not only teaching, but it can, it can help take us to our future, hopefully better than the past.
And so with that, my final formal question, I told you I'll come back at the end, but my final formal question for you is, what is better, you think, now in terms of race relations than it was when we were growing up here and when your dad was president at Grambling?
It's been inclement weather all week. Monday was MLK Day, so the kids were out of school. Tuesday we had a storm. Today is Thursday. They've been out of school all day. And we just got a text message saying Caddo will be out of school tomorrow. So I've been kind of with my son all week and just trying to spend a little time with him. And I've been in a good mood, Jeffrey. Now you got me in this super serious social scientist type to talk about race relations in our town. And, I don't want to trivialize it at all. But I guess it's just the mood I'm in because of this week, or, just my age. I don't know. But I just, I feel like we can celebrate the progress that we're making, the progress that is being felt by some, not all. But I will say this, to go from a city where, blacks could only go to the state fair in Shreveport on what they call Dog Day. That was in my parents' generation. My parents used to tell me about how, my mom used to tell me specifically about how they could not go to Rubenstein's or Selber Brothers or Pally Royal back in the day and try on clothes just because they were black. My son will never know that type of racist action towards someone, or rather towards him because he is black. That is an improvement. I suffered far less racial just negativities than the generation before me. So I want to just say that, yeah, we are improving. I think that, I don't know, Jeffrey, since I really started doing a lot of training, of doing corporate training and municipal employee training, I guess, I'm out of that kind of academic pondering on, the ills of our society and, and what makes Shreveport not as good as it could be. I guess I've always been, and particularly as a Morehouse man, I was charged to putting an eye on those ills of society and really standing up to be one of those courageous souls to help do something about it. And so I guess I'm more focused now on what kind of legacy I can leave. What can I impart in my students or in my trainees that will engage them to make this city even better? Michael Coleman, my son, will have an opportunity to do that. It won't look like it looked when I was coming up, you know what I mean? But I hope he still understands that fairness is an issue and that there is an advantage if all of us embrace fairness. And so I think in those ways, we've made progress and we will continue to make progress as a city.
Well, Michael, I appreciate you being here. I told you when we started, I'll come back to you at the end. Is there anything, I know you brought some books. Do you want to talk about the books, or is there anything we didn't discuss today? I know I didn't throw you a lot of softballs. I love seeing you. I love having you on here.
Likewise.
And I wouldn't ask you these questions if I didn't feel comfortable with you.
Yeah, and I appreciate you even having that comfortability to ask me. Jeff, really, I had to trust you to let my son come sit on your couch and be interviewed. I mean, you've had some important folk in here, and I think my son is an important young man. But I mean, I wasn't here. I didn't hold his hand. I want him to experience life and really represent himself, and that's actually why I have him here now. I want him to see this honest, engaging conversation that you and I have. But I want to thank you for handling that interview very well and certainly handling me very well. But there are some things I do want to come back to. And I'll start with the books that I have. And so one thing I do a lot is I like to share what I'm reading. And that's just an old teacher thing in me. A couple of books that I'm reading. The first one is Smart Brevity. The creators of Axios and Politico wrote this book, and it just struck my attention in the bookstore. But it talks about the benefit of being brief in email conversations and presentations, and even in conversations, something that I have not done, I know. But it's made me look differently at my expressions, mostly written, but really, how can I get my point across with fewer words?
And before you start, who put you onto that book? Like, I'm always curious how people curate what they watch, what they listen to, what they read.
Okay, that one just happened to catch my eye. And I was just in the mood for a quick read, and you can read it in one setting. And I just kind of saw it at Barnes and Noble and was drawn to it. It says, "The Power of Saying More with Less." And so I said, this sounds interesting. So that's how I got to that book. That book I have probably recommended more than any book in the past year or so. There's a recruiter for Shreveport Police Department, Tiffany Oliver. She's a bibliophile as well. She's a lover of books. And so I only recommend books to her that I really enjoy and have read, and that was the one that I recommended to Tiffany. So I'm recommending that to your viewing audience. The next one is by Dr. Randall Pickett. This is a Wiley book. It's kind of an academic book, but it's data-driven DEI. And I like this book because it has me, it's validating some of the measures I use when I talk about fairness or try to introduce fairness to different companies. Sometimes DEI can be so loaded a term, people want to fight against it for certain reasons. But when I present my program as an advantage to being fair, it's hard to get people to say, no, heck no, we don't want to be fair in this organization, not here. So it's kind of reassuring to read that. But it's a little academic book, and it's just something that's come across. I think one of the equity leadership groups that I belong to, someone recommended that book, but that's just kind of a strictly nerdy academic book. And then finally, I really want to recommend this book, probably because I'm proud of myself that I have even embarked reading a book this thick. I'm like my dad. If it's this thick, I need to listen to it on audiobooks. But if you want to know the backstory, it's so funny, Jeffrey. I graduated from Morehouse College, and like a lot of people who go to small, private, particularly black colleges, they are familiar with the concept of having chapel. My daughter is a junior at Dillard University in New Orleans, where my wife graduated from, and she still has chapel. And so at Morehouse, every Thursday, every student would have to assemble in the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel to hear chapel, some speaker or something. And so, this was in the 90s, so technology was not what it was today. So once I got to know the upperclassmen who had the clipboard, I would say, "Hey man, Mike Hicks, you got me?" And they would sign Mike Hicks, and I would not go to chapel. But now, having said that, they televised Morehouse College's chapel on YouTube. Actually, I watched it today. But it's funny, I watch chapel more and participate in it more now that I'm out of school than when I was a student. But about 6-7 months ago, there was an author who had been invited to speak at chapel that day, and I was watching it at my desk on YouTube, and it happened to be the guy who wrote the biography of let me see, these are some of his books. Jonathan Eigg is his name, E-I-G, Eigg, but he wrote The Birth of the Pill, How Four Crusaders reinvented sex and launched a revolution. He wrote Get Capone, The Secret Plot That Captured America's Most Wanted Gangster. He wrote Opening Day, The Story of Jackie Robinson's First Season. And he wrote Luckiest Man, The Life and Death of Lou Gehrig. And so he is a biographer who is of the highest rank. And when he talked about this book at chapel, just his talk about the research he did into it and how it is different from every other biography that has been done on King because he has access to different research. More CIA papers, more surveillance papers have come out. More documents that were sealed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation have come out, and he used that. He even used some interviews with King's associates and colleagues that just weren't made available in the 80s and 90s. And so what he paints is a picture of the true man, not the person that we've kind of elevated to a race relation king who says, I have a dream that white people and black people can live together in harmony, but the true young, fiery preacher whose main message was economic fairness. I mean, people forget why he was in Memphis the weekend he was shot. He was leading an economic rally. You know, he wanted fairness for sanitation workers and pay, fairness for city workers. And so what we get in this book is just an exciting, I think, a fresh look. And being a Morehouse man, King graduated from Morehouse. Of course, I've read all his books. I've been taught by one of the professors who taught him taught me. And so King is definitely in my intellectual pedigree, but this book has just changed my thinking on who he was as a man, as a father, as a husband. We're talking about someone who was followed 24 hours a day by the CIA, who, would tell his wife things about his personal life, and who would use things to destroy his family, and yet he kept his sanity. He kept his stride. And of course, he didn't live a long life, but we know it was impactful. So that book, I think, plus the fact that it's over 400 pages, man, it's just, I'm proud of myself for reading that book. I got to give myself a little props on that. I'm getting old, and it's hard to reject the audio books, but that's what's on my desk. I try to stay abreast of what's going on in Shreveport with the local papers, but I like learning what people are reading. So I got to put you on the spot, Jeff. You don't have your books in there, but when I did watch this podcast, I saw some interesting books, starting with Sun Tzu right there. So I will ask you, what are you reading, Jeff?
I would say I've actually have more books right now than I ever have that I'm in the middle of.
That's a good thing.
I'm actually reading a Robert Caro biography on Lyndon Johnson. He's kind of the definitive biographer on Lyndon Johnson. He's written 4 close to 1,000-page books each on Lyndon Johnson. Wow. He's in his 80s. He's trying to write his 5th and final book on Lyndon Johnson before he passes away. So I'm in the middle of the first book of that. I do a collaboration with Norton Art Gallery once a quarter where it's a film club, and we're showing Get Out on March 1st. So I'm reading 2 books right now to help me prep for my talk on Get Out.
Okay. Invite me to that talk, by the way.
Okay, I will. Absolutely. And then I was at, my mom's going to kill me. I was at the Museum for Southern Jewish Life in New Orleans or something like, I don't know the exact name, but... Mom,
do you hear this?
I know. I'm in trouble.
Send that email as soon as you watch this.
I'm in trouble. But they had an exhibit, which you may know about or not, but I didn't know anything about the Rosenwald schools.
Oh, wow.
So they have an exhibit on the second floor about the Rosenwald schools, and I was really moved by the exhibit, and they had a book. I bought 2 books about the exhibit and the relationship between Booker T. Washington and Rosenwald. So I'm reading that as well. So I'm in the middle of far too much right now, but really stimulating stuff that I'm enjoying quite a bit.
Wow, you'll have to share that LBJ biography, but it's interesting, and you'll notice, Jeff, I won't give this away, but when we think of Rosenwald schools here in this part of the country, the closest one we can really talk about is Wiley, but there's an interesting connection to Shreveport when it comes to the Rosenwald. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk more about that maybe in a different setting. I don't know. This is a great studio. I think the professional team you have here seem to like me. Who knows? I could be the first repeat guest, and they're laughing right now. Our producer is laughing behind camera, but I don't know, man. I really have enjoyed this time we spent together, Jeffrey. So I really want to thank you for inviting me, and I do look forward to hearing your talk on Get Out. I used to, and maybe Christy is watching this at the Community Foundation, I used to do a quarterly or maybe a twice a year book talk where we would all, the Community Foundation would put on their website what the book is, and then we'd read it, and then we'd come talk about it. I would lead those discussions. The last one we did at Norton, you made me think about that. So, Christy, if you're listening to this, I want to revitalize the Community Foundation book club, hint, hint. So hopefully that makes its way to her inbox at some point.
I would love that. Yeah, we love Christy. She's been a guest, and then she actually co-hosted the episode that we published this morning. So we've had 2 co-hosts. She was our second one. So we're a big fan.
Okay, well, Chrissy, it's definitely going to reach your inbox. And as the soon-to-be third co-host of this great podcast, I want to thank you for blazing a trail of journalistic and creative integrity that led you right here on the couch with Jeffrey. So thank you, Christy.
Michael, anything else?
I think that's it. I think I've thanked you for interviewing my son. I think you did a great job. Thank you for this time. And thank you for what you do, man. I think you're making a difference through this podcast. You asked earlier, what could we do to improve things? And I think just by inviting a diverse set of folk to this set, man, is really going a long way. I have certainly learned since I started watching. Quite honestly, when you had Dr. Graham from the Baird Family Foundation, I think that was one of the most just enlightening conversations ever. I know I'm not as poised and professional as she is, but I have tried in earnest to rise to her level. But Jeffrey, I want to encourage you until you definitely keep doing what you're doing. It's making a difference in our city.
Thanks, Michael. Great to see you. It's been too long.
Likewise.